The morning of October 17, 2010, began like any other autumn day in the quiet town of Millfield, Pennsylvania. Leaves crunched beneath shoes, breath fogged in the crisp morning air. Parents hugged their children goodbye at the entrance of Millfield Elementary School, watching as 30 excited third graders boarded a yellow school bus for their annual field trip to the Harrington Natural History Museum, 40 miles north. At precisely 8:15 a.m., bus driver Raymond Thurman closed the folding door, nodded to Principal Donna Walsh through the window, and pulled away from the curb. The faces of 8-year-olds pressed against windows, waving to parents who smiled and waved back. Teacher Elaine Porter took attendance one final time, checking off 30 names from her clipboard. Two parent chaperones, Thomas Nichols and Patricia Lombardi, sat near the front, thumbing through informational packets about dinosaur exhibits. No one knew that this ordinary yellow school bus carrying 30 children, one teacher, two parent volunteers, and a driver would never arrive at its destination. By 10:30 AD, museum staff grew concerned. No school bus, no phone calls explaining a delay. When Director of Operations Samuel Green called Principal Walsh to inquire about the tardiness, her confused reply sent a chill down his spine. They should have arrived over an hour ago. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation in Pennsylvania state history. State police mobilized immediately. Roadblocks appeared on every major highway within a 100-mile radius. Helicopters swept dense forests along the route. The FBI arrived by nightfall. 34 faces appeared on television screens across America. Missing Raymond Thurman, 57, bus driver. Missing Elaine Porter, 32, third-grade teacher. Missing Thomas Nichols, 41, parent volunteer. Missing Patricia Lombardi, 38, parent volunteer. Missing 30 children, ages 8 and 9. Vanished without a trace. No skid marks on any road. No debris indicating an accident. No distress calls from any cell phone. No sightings by any passing motorist. Just 34 people and a yellow school bus that seemed to evaporate into thin air. It defied logic, recalled former FBI agent Derek Harlow, who led the initial investigation. In my 30 years with the Bureau, I had never seen anything like it. A vehicle that size, with that many occupants, doesn't simply disappear without someone seeing something. But that's exactly what happened. For days, then weeks, then months, the search continued. Parents held vigils. The national media descended upon the small town. Theories ranged from a catastrophic accident in a remote location to an elaborate kidnapping scheme. Conspiracy websites suggested government experiments, alien abductions, or mass voluntary disappearances. The case went cold. Years passed. The pain never subsided in Millfield, but life inevitably moved forward. The elementary school erected a memorial garden with 34 stone markers. Families moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders. Some divorced under the weight of unspeakable grief. Others founded organizations dedicated to missing children. And then, 10 years later, on June 24, 2020, construction worker Franklin Torres was operating an excavator at the site of a new shopping development 30 miles east of Millfield. The land had previously belonged to Westridge Mining Company, abandoned in the 1990s after copper deposits were exhausted. As Torres dug into what used to be an auxiliary parking area, his machine struck something solid, something large and metal, buried approximately 15 feet underground. What Torres uncovered that afternoon would reignite a decade-old mystery and reveal horrors beyond imagination. "I saw yellow paint," Torres later testified. "Then I realized I was looking at the roof of a school bus. My blood ran cold. I just knew. The bus had been deliberately buried." Forensic analysis would later determine that a massive excavator similar to the one Torres operated had dug an enormous pit, placed the bus inside, and covered it with earth and gravel. This was no ordinary crime. This required planning, heavy machinery, and a remote location where such activities would go unnoticed. When authorities cut through the roof of the buried vehicle, they discovered the first body, Raymond Thurman, still strapped into the driver's seat. a single gunshot wound to the back of his head. Throughout the bus, in their original seating positions, were the decomposed remains of 33 other victims. Elaine Porter near the front, Thomas Nichols and Patricia Lombardi in the second row, and in neat rows behind them, 30 children still wearing backpacks, still clutching permission slips and small toys. All 34 victims had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, execution style. Ballistic evidence confirmed the same weapon had been used on all victims. The bus doors had been welded shut from the outside. Most disturbing of all, soil samples from inside the bus suggested the vehicle had been buried while at least some victims were still alive. "This wasn't just murder," said FBI Special Agent Vanessa Hammond, who headed the reopened investigation. "This was calculated, methodical extermination with a level of cruelty that stunned even veteran investigators. For the families who had spent a decade wondering about the fate of their loved ones, the discovery brought a devastating end to their uncertainty. For law enforcement, it presented a baffling question. Who could orchestrate such an elaborate, meticulous mass murder, and why target a busload of elementary school children? The investigation began by re-examining every detail from 2010, with the newfound context that this was premeditated murder, rather than a disappearance or accident. Security footage from the school that morning showed nothing unusual. The bus departed on schedule. Traffic cameras captured it traveling north on Route 27, following its expected path, until it turned unexpectedly onto rural Route 88, a decommissioned mining road that didn't appear on the official trip itinerary. This crucial deviation occurred at 8:47 a.m., approximately 10 miles into their journey. Why would Thurman, a 20-year veteran driver with an impeccable safety record, divert from the established route? The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the bus was discovered, police received an anonymous package. Inside was a VHS tape containing footage from a camera that had been mounted inside the bus, a camera whose existence hadn't been disclosed to investigators in 2010 because the school district had installed it without proper authorization as part of a pilot security program. The footage showed the ordinary start of the field trip. Children chattering excitedly, Elaine Porter taking attendance, the bus pulling away from the school. 17 minutes into the recording, a black sedan appeared in the rear-view mirror camera view, flashing what appeared to be police lights. Thurman pulled over. A man in what looked like a police uniform approached the driver's window. After a brief exchange, Thurman opened the door. The officer boarded said something to the adults at the front of the bus, then displayed what appeared to be a badge and map to Elaine Porter. He pointed to an alternative route, rural Route 88, explaining something that caused Porter to nod in agreement. The officer exited. Thurman pulled back onto the road, following the sedan, and made the fatal turn onto rural Route 88. The VHS footage ended there. "We now had our answer about the route deviation," Agent Hammond explained. "Someone impersonating a police officer had intercepted the bus. But this only deepened the mystery. Who was this person, and how did they know about the field trip?" The false officer's face wasn't clearly visible in the footage, but his build suggested a man approximately 6 feet tall, average build, Caucasian. The black sedan had no visible license plate. The police lights appeared to be the removable magnetic type available through specialty equipment supplier. Investigators then focused on the burial site. The land had belonged to Westridge Mining Company until 2017, when it was sold to Criterion Development Group. Between 2010 and 2017, the property had been essentially abandoned. Chain-link fences surrounded the perimeter, but security was minimal. According to former security guard James Wilcox, who had been responsible for weekly drive-by checks, the property was easy to access if someone was determined. Those old mining facilities had their own heavy equipment left behind, Wilcox stated. Company went bankrupt, couldn't afford to move it all out. Excavators, bulldozers, all just sitting there. If someone knew how to operate that machinery, they could have done whatever they wanted out there, especially at night. The timeline established by forensic evidence suggested the burial occurred within 24-48 hours of the abduction. Soil analysis inside the bus contained particulates consistent with the victims being alive during at least part of the burial process. This horrific detail shifted public perception of the case from tragic to monstrous. Who could commit such an act, and why? Investigators developed several theories. The first centered on Raymond Thurman, the bus driver. Could he have been coerced into cooperation? His financial records showed nothing unusual. No sudden deposits, no reduction in debt. His personal life appeared stable. His employment record was spotless. Interviews with family members revealed a man dedicated to his job who genuinely enjoyed working with children. Nothing indicated he would participate willingly in such a scheme. The second theory examined possible targeting of teacher Elaine Porter. Unmarried, Porter had moved to Millfield 3 years before the incident. Background checks in 2010 had yielded nothing suspicious, but with renewed scrutiny in 2020, investigators discovered she had briefly dated William Kessler, a man with connections to organized crime in Pittsburgh. The relationship had ended badly 6 months before the field trip. Kessler, however, had an airtight alibi for October 17, 2010. He had been in federal custody on unrelated charges. When interviewed in prison where he was serving a 15-year sentence for racketeering, Kessler expressed genuine shock at Porter's fate. Elaine? Someone did that to Elaine? Jesus Christ. His reaction, according to agents present, appeared authentic. The third and most disturbing theory considered that one of the children might have been the primary target, with the others killed to eliminate witnesses. This led investigators to examine the backgrounds of all 30 children and their families. Most came from ordinary middle-class households, but 3 families stood out. Joshua Wilson, age 8, was the son of federal prosecutor Allison Wilson, who had secured convictions against members of the Salvatore crime family 3 months before the abduction. Olivia Patel, age 9, was the daughter of Dr. Rajan Patel, a research scientist working on classified projects for the Department of Defense. Michael Delaney, age 8, was the nephew of FBI whistleblower Timothy Delaney, who had recently agreed to testify about corruption within a specialized counter-terrorism unit. Each of these connections offered potential motives for targeting specific children. But the scale and brutality of killing 30 additional people to reach one target struck investigators as disproportionate, even for organized crime or government conspiracies. "We kept coming back to the same question," said Agent Hammond. "Who benefits from killing 30 children? What possible motive could justify such an extreme act?" The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the ballistic evidence recovered from the bus. The bullets removed from all 34 victims came from a Sig Sauer P226, a common handgun. But forensic analysis revealed something unusual. These bullets contained a rare alloy composition used exclusively by a private military contractor called Aegis Strategic Solutions. Between 2008 and 2011, Aegis had held contracts with various government agencies and provided security for overseas operations. More relevantly, they had also been hired by Westridge Mining Company for property security during active operations, ending their contract when the mine closed in 2009. This connection to both the murder weapon and the burial location was too significant to ignore. "We shifted our focus entirely to Aegis," Hammond explained. "Who had access to their ammunition? Who among their personnel knew about the Westridge property? And most importantly, who had the skills and psychological profile to commit such a methodical mass murder?" The investigation led to former Aegis operative Noah Sullivan, 43, who had been discharged from the company in January 2010 after exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior following multiple combat deployments. His personnel file noted expertise with heavy machinery, a skill he had acquired before his military service. Sullivan had no criminal record, but psychological evaluations had flagged concerns about his detachment and difficulty in reintegrating into civilian environments. When agents arrived at Sullivan's last known address in Ohio, they found the house abandoned. Neighbors reported he had left suddenly 3 weeks earlier, immediately after news broke about the discovery of the bus. Sullivan's sudden disappearance elevated him from person of interest to prime suspect. A nationwide manhunt began, with Sullivan's face appearing on digital billboards across the country. What investigators found in Sullivan's home painted a disturbing picture. The basement contained a locked room that neighbors didn't know existed. Inside was a shrine-like display of newspaper clippings about the bus disappearance, arranged chronologically around the walls. Maps of Millfield with the school and route marked in red. Printouts of Westridge Mining Company property layouts, most disturbing of all 34 small crosses arranged on a table, each bearing a victim's name written in meticulous handwriting. He had been following the case from the beginning, Hammond said, not as an observer, but as the architect. Yet nothing in the room explained why Sullivan had targeted this specific bus on this specific day. The motive remained elusive. The answer came from Linda Hoffman, Sullivan's former therapist, who contacted authorities after recognizing his photo in news coverage. Despite confidentiality concerns, Hoffman believed the circumstances warranted disclosure. According to Hoffman, Sullivan had suffered from severe PTSD after his military service. During therapy sessions in 2009, he had fixated on a traumatic incident from his childhood, a field trip where he had been severely bullied by classmates and humiliated by a teacher who failed to intervene. This event had occurred at the Harrington Natural History Museum, the same destination as the Millfield Elementary field trip. He spoke about that museum repeatedly, Hoffman recalled. He described it as the place where his innocence died. He talked about children as being cruel by nature, teachers as enablers of suffering. When I tried to help him see that his experience wasn't universal, he became withdrawn. Hoffman had noted concern about Sullivan's black and white thinking and potential for retaliatory fantasies, but he had never explicitly threatened violence during their sessions, which ended when he stopped attending in December 2009. This psychological profile suggested a motive based not on any connection to the specific victims, but on what they represented to Sullivan's damaged psyche, a reenactment of his childhood trauma, with him taking control this time. We believe Sullivan monitored local schools, looking for field trips to the museum, Agent Hammond theorized. When he saw the Millfield trip scheduled, he meticulously planned his revenge against symbols rather than specific people. Those 34 victims died because they unknowingly walked into one man's psychological nightmare. As the manhunt for Sullivan intensified, the recovered bus yielded one final, crucial piece of evidence. Hidden beneath the driver's seat, investigators found a flash drive sealed in waterproof material. The drive contained a video file, a manifesto recorded by Sullivan himself, apparently intended to be discovered years later. In the 56-minute recording, a younger Sullivan, speaking calmly and directly to the camera, explained his actions in chilling detail. He described how he had observed the school for weeks, noting the security patterns and bus schedules. He outlined how he had acquired the police uniform and modified the sedan. He even demonstrated the welding equipment he planned to use on the bus doors. "Today I correct a fundamental imbalance," Sullivan stated in the recording. "Society pretends childhood is innocent. I will demonstrate its cruelty. The world will search for these children, mourn these children, but they would grow into the same adults who perpetuate suffering. I am not taking lives. I am preventing the formation of more monsters." The manifesto continued with increasingly delusional justifications, revealing a mind completely detached from moral reality. Sullivan described how he would allow the victims to contemplate their fate before executing them one by one, starting with the adults. How he would then seal them in the bus and bury it with industrial equipment he knew was available at his former worksite. "They will feel the earth cover them," he said, without emotion. "They will understand, finally, what it means to be buried alive by indifference." The video ended with Sullivan's declaration, "In 10 years, when they find this bus, I will be watching. I will see if the world has learned anything from their loss." The recording was dated October 15, 2010, 2 days before the abduction. He had planned for the bus to be discovered eventually, Agent Hammond explained. The burial wasn't meant to hide the crime permanently. It was part of his twisted message. He wanted the horror of what he'd done to be revealed after enough time had passed for him to observe the impact. The manhunt for Noah Sullivan expanded internationally. Interpol issued a red notice. Border security tightened. Facial recognition systems scanned crowds in transportation hubs across the country. Then, on July 15, 2020, 3 weeks after the discovery of the bus, security cameras at Pittsburgh International Airport captured a man resembling Sullivan boarding a flight to Toronto. Canadian authorities were alerted immediately. When the flight landed, passengers deplaned under normal procedures while plainclothes officers positioned themselves throughout the terminal. The man matching Sullivan's description was followed to a restroom, where officers prepared to make an arrest. They found him slumped in a stool, an empty pill bottle beside him. A suicide note in his pocket read simply, "The demonstration is complete." Noah Sullivan was pronounced dead at 7:42 p.m. Dental records confirmed his identity. For the families of 34 victims, Sullivan's suicide denied them the closure of a trial, the opportunity to confront their loved one's killer, to ask the question that still haunted them: why? "He took the coward's way out," said Michael Wilson, father of victim Joshua Wilson. "He couldn't face what he'd done, couldn't face us. And now we are left with nothing but questions that will never be answered." But the investigation wasn't complete. Sullivan's manifesto had referred to observing the public response to the discovery. This suggested he had been monitoring news coverage, possibly from nearby. His sudden flight after 3 weeks coincided with a specific development in the case: the identification of the bullet alloy that led investigators to Aegis. "We believe Sullivan had been hiding somewhere in the Millfield area, watching the investigation unfold," Agent Hammond said. "Only when he realized we were closing in did he attempt to flee." This theory was confirmed when police located a rental cabin 40 miles from Millfield, paid for in cash by a man using the alias Raymond Thomas, a combination of the bus driver's first name and the parent volunteer's first name. The cabin had been rented continuously since May 2020, 1 month before construction began at the former mining site. Inside, investigators found a laptop containing browser histories showing constant monitoring of local news sites covering the bus discovery. More disturbing were hundreds of photographs taken with a long-range lens, showing the excavation site, grieving family members at memorial services, and FBI agents working the case. Sullivan had indeed been watching his demonstration unfold, just as his manifesto had promised. The laptop also contained a journal describing Sullivan's decade between the murders and the discovery. He had traveled extensively, working under aliases, always returning to Pennsylvania periodically to check on his buried secret. The journal entries revealed an increasingly delusional mind, convinced that his act would eventually be recognized as necessary and enlightening. "I wait for the world to see what I have shown them," read one entry from 2018. The lesson buried beneath their feet. With Sullivan's death, the case was officially closed. The 34 victims were finally laid to rest in proper graves, surrounded by the love of those who had searched for them for 10 years. The school bus, that tragic yellow coffin, was disposed of according to the family's wishes, completely destroyed, with no part of it preserved. But for the community of Millfield, the discovery had opened wounds that had never fully healed. Parents who had moved forward with fractured lives now faced renewed trauma. Children who had been born after the tragedy grew up in its resurrected shadow. The question shifted from what happened to them to how do we live with knowing what happened to them. For FBI agent Vanessa Hammond, the case left a profound mark. "In my career I have seen many terrible things," she reflected. But the calculated nature of Sullivan's actions, the planning, the patience, the absolute conviction in his twisted logic, that represents a kind of evil that's difficult to comprehend. The Millfield bus case remains one of the most disturbing mass murders in American history, not only for its scale but for the decade of uncertain suffering it caused before the truth emerged. The story serves as a somber reminder of how a single person's damaged mind can inflict generational trauma on an entire community. And yet, questions still linger at the edges of the case. Sullivan's manifesto and journal suggested a man acting alone, driven by personal demons. But some investigators quietly wonder if the operation truly could have been executed by a single individual, no matter how methodical. The weight and size of a school bus, 34 victims, the precision of the burial, the complete absence of witnesses, despite the scale of the crime. Could Noah Sullivan, despite his military training and psychological detachment, have managed all this alone? Or was there more to the story, a darker chapter yet to be revealed? As the first anniversary of the bus discovery approaches, these questions remain unanswered. For now, the town of Millfield attempts to heal once more, honoring 34 lives cut tragically short, and struggling to make sense of a senseless act. But beneath the surface of the official narrative, something doesn't quite add up. And for a few determined individuals, the search for the complete truth continues, a truth that may be even more disturbing than what has already been uncovered. The buried bus has revealed its occupants, but it may not have revealed all its secrets. The suicide of Noah Sullivan should have brought closure to the Millfield bus case. The monster had been identified, his methods documented, his twisted rationale laid bare in his own words. The 34 victims had been properly laid to rest, their families granted the bitter comfort of finally knowing what happened to their loved ones. But in the months following Sullivan's death, inconsistencies in the official narrative began to surface. Small details that didn't align, questions that lacked satisfactory answers, threads that, when pulled, threatened to unravel the entire tapestry of the investigation. It started with Amanda Gallagher, mother of victim Zachary Gallagher, while sorting through her son's belongings preserved exactly as they had been the morning he left for school 10 years earlier. She found something overlooked in the initial investigation, a disposable camera. Zachary was going through a photography phase, Amanda recalled. He took that camera everywhere. I bought it for him specifically for the museum trip, so he could photograph the dinosaur exhibits. The camera, still in its original packaging, had never been opened. That's when I realized something was wrong, Amanda said. Zachary would never have left for the museum without opening that camera. It was the whole reason he was excited about the trip. He must have left it behind. Which means he took a different camera, one that was never recovered from the bus. This observation might have been dismissed as the overthinking of a grieving mother, except for what happened next. Amanda shared her discovery in an online support group for the Millfield families. Within days, 6 other parents reported similar discrepancies, items supposedly taken on the trip that weren't found on the bus, or items reported among the recovered possessions that their children wouldn't have brought. Lily Novak was wearing a heart-shaped locket in the final photograph taken of her that morning, yet no locket was catalogued among her recovered possessions. Brandon Teller's insulin kit was found on the bus, but his mother insisted he carried a distinctive blue case, not the standard black one recovered. Twins Emily and Anna Prescott had reportedly packed matching unicorn notebooks, but only plain spiral notebooks were found in their backpacks. These inconsistencies attracted the attention of Diane Yarbrough, a journalist who had covered the original disappearance and subsequent discovery for the Pittsburgh Gazette. Yarbrough began systematically interviewing family members, documenting every discrepancy between what children allegedly brought onto the bus and what was recovered 10 years later. At first, I thought these were simply the distortions of memory after a decade of grief, Yarbrough explained. But the pattern became too consistent to ignore. In total, 27 of the 30 families reported at least one significant discrepancy. Yarbrough compiled her findings and presented them to the FBI. Agent Hammond, now heading the Bureau's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team in Washington, reviewed the material but remained skeptical. We have to consider that, after 10 years of decomposition and environmental factors, many items wouldn't be in recognizable condition, Hammond stated officially. Additionally, human memory is fallible, especially when traumatized. These inconsistencies, while emotionally significant, don't necessarily indicate investigative errors. Yarbrough wasn't convinced. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests for complete forensic reports from the bus excavation. What she received, heavily redacted, contained disturbing anomalies. Soil samples from inside the bus showed compositional differences from the surrounding burial site. Trace elements indicated the bus had potentially been stored somewhere else before being buried. More concerning, radiocarbon dating of organic material inside the bus suggested it may have been buried significantly later than October 2010, possibly as much as 2 years later. These findings contradicted the entire timeline of the investigation, Yarbrough noted. If the bus wasn't buried immediately after the abduction, where was it during that intervening period? And more importantly, what happened to the victims during that time? When confronted with these discrepancies, the FBI maintained that technical limitations and contamination could explain the inconsistent dating results. They stood by their conclusion that Sullivan had acted alone and had buried the bus within 48 hours of the abduction, as described in his manifesto. But another investigative thread was unraveling simultaneously, pursued by retired Detective Lawrence Mercer, who had worked the original missing persons case in 2010. Never satisfied with the Sullivan confession, Mercer had spent his retirement examining overlooked evidence, particularly the VHF's footage from inside the bus. Using enhanced digital processing unavailable during the original investigation, Mercer isolated a reflection in the bus window at the moment the fake police officer boarded. The reflection revealed a second vehicle behind the black sedan, a van with partial lettering visible on its side. GIS Jesu Mercer transcribed. Likely Aegis Solutions, with parts obscured. This suggested Sullivan wasn't working alone. He had backup. Mercer then focused on the burial site itself. The official report concluded that Sullivan had used abandoned mining equipment to dig the massive hole and bury the bus. But Mercer consulted with mining engineers who expressed skepticism. Even with heavy machinery experience, burying something that large would require multiple people, stated Edward Covington, former operations manager at Westridge Mining. The excavation, positioning and backfilling would take a coordinated team, especially if done hurriedly at night. One person couldn't manage it alone, no matter how skilled. Mercer's investigation led him to employment records for Aegis Strategic Solutions. While Sullivan had indeed been discharged in January 2010, the company had maintained a small security detail at Westridge until March 2011. Despite the mine's closure, this team, consisting of 4 contractors, had unrestricted access to the property during the exact timeframe of the abduction. The supervisor of this team was Victor Rawlins, 52, a former military colleague of Sullivan's who had advocated for his hiring at Aegis despite psychological red flags. After Sullivan's dismissal, Rawlins had remained with the company until 2015, when he retired to Arizona. When Mercer attempted to locate Rawlins for questioning, he discovered the man had died in a single-vehicle accident 3 days after Sullivan's suicide, an accident with no witnesses on a remote desert road. 2 key figures potentially connected to the same crime, both dead within days of each other, Mercer noted. That's not coincidence. That's cleanup. Meanwhile, Diane Yarbrough pursued another inconsistency: Noah Sullivan's movements during the decade between the abduction and discovery. His journal found in the rental cabin. Discovery. His journal found in the rental cabin with various aliases. But when Yarbrough cross-referenced these travels with passport records and international databases, she found no evidence Sullivan had ever left the country. His journal described trips to 17 countries on 4 continents, Yarbrough said. Yet there's no record of anyone matching his description or using his known aliases crossing any international border during that decade. He claimed to be in Bangladesh during a period when cell tower data placed his phone in Philadelphia. He wrote about witnessing a political protest in Cairo that occurred while hospital records show him receiving treatment for kidney stones in Pittsburgh. The journal, it seemed, was fiction, a carefully constructed alibi for 10 years of missing time. But if Sullivan hadn't been traveling the world, where had he been? And why fabricate such an elaborate cover story? The answer emerged from an unexpected source. Westridge Mining Company's sealed bankruptcy records. Attorney Rachel Davidson, representing former Westridge employees in a pension dispute, uncovered financial transfers between Westridge and Aegis that continued long after their official contract had terminated. Between 2010 and 2015, Westridge made quarterly payments to Aegis totaling $2,700,000. 0 cents, Davidson revealed. These payments were disguised as environmental remediation consulting, but no such services were ever provided. Essentially, Westridge was paying Aegis for something completely off the books. When Davidson shared this information with Yarbrough and Mercer, the outlines of a much larger conspiracy began to take shape. Westridge had owned numerous properties beyond the burial site, including an abandoned processing facility 30 miles north of Millfield, a massive industrial complex with restricted access and no nearby residential areas. Property records showed this facility had maintained electrical service throughout its supposed abandonment. Satellite imagery revealed vehicle activity around the complex between 2010 and 2012. Most disturbing of all, when Mercer obtained utility records, he discovered water usage consistent with a continuously occupied facility, far more than would be needed for basic maintenance. We believe the bus and its occupants were taken to this facility immediately after the abduction. Mercer theorized the victims were held there for an extended period, possibly up to 2 years, before being executed and buried at the mining site. Sullivan wasn't working alone. He was part of something much bigger. But what would be the motive for such an elaborate operation? What possible reason could justify abducting a busload of children, holding them for years, then executing and burying them? The answer lay with Dr. Rajan Patel, father of victim Olivia Patel. In August 2021, nearly a year after the bus discovery, Dr. Patel contacted Yarbrough directly. After months of soul-searching, he had decided to reveal classified information about his work, information he believed directly connected to his daughter's death. "I can't live with this secret anymore," Dr. Patel told Yarbrough, "not if it means her killers escape justice." Dr. Patel had been employed by defense contractor North Star Dynamics, working on classified neurological research. His team had developed an experimental protocol called cognitive recalibration therapy, a procedure combining pharmaceutical interventions with psychological conditioning designed to treat severe PTSD in military personnel. Initial results had been promising, with subjects reporting significant reduction in traumatic responses. But in 2009, the program had shifted focus under new management. Instead of treating trauma, researchers were directed to explore whether CR2 could be used to enhance soldier performance by suppressing fear responses entirely. They wanted to create fearless operatives, Dr. Patel explained. Individuals who could function in high-stress combat situations, without psychological limitations. But the new protocols had catastrophic side effects, developed extreme detachment, diminished empathy, and in some cases, sadistic tendencies. Dr. Patel had attempted to shut down the modified program, compiling evidence of ethical violations and dangerous outcomes. 3 weeks before the Millfield bus disappearance, he had submitted this documentation to the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General, requesting an immediate investigation. 2 days after I filed that report, my daughter's field trip was announced, Dr. Patel said. I believe she was targeted to silence me, but they took the entire bus to make it look random, to hide the fact that she was the real target. Records confirmed that Noah Sullivan had been among the first subjects in the original CRG program following combat trauma. After his discharge from Aegis, Sullivan had participated in the modified program as a paid research subject. His psychological deterioration, documented in company records, aligned precisely with the side effects Dr. Patel had flagged as dangerous. Sullivan wasn't just a killer, Dr. Patel concluded. He was a weapon pointed at my daughter to ensure my silence. But this explanation, while accounting for Sullivan's involvement, didn't explain the extended captivity period or the massive resources required for such an operation. Yarbrough and Mercer continued digging, focusing on the abandoned processing facility where they believed the victims had been held. Through confidential sources within government contracting, they discovered that Aegis Strategic Solutions had formed a subsidiary in 2009 called Threshold Behavioral Research. This entity had received classified contracts from an unnamed government agency for extended human subject research in controlled environments. The timing was unmistakable. The contracts began 3 months before the Millfield abduction and terminated approximately 2 years later, aligning with the revised timeline suggested by forensic evidence from the bus. "We believe the 34 victims weren't just murdered," Yarbrough stated, in a comprehensive investigative piece published in April 2022. "They were used as unwilling research subjects in classified behavioral experiments for nearly 2 years before being executed and buried." This explosive allegation sent shockwaves through government agencies. Official denials came swiftly. Aegis issued statements dismissing the claims as conspiracy theories and grievous insults to the victims' families. The FBI maintained that their investigation had been thorough and that Sullivan had acted alone.
But the mounting evidence couldn't be easily dismissed. When former Aegis security personnel began coming forward with corroborating testimony describing convoy movements, unusual security protocols, and strictly restricted areas within the processing facility, public pressure forced congressional action. In July 2022, a classified congressional hearing convened to examine the allegations. Dr. Patel testified about the CRT program. Former Aegis employees described a security operations at the processing facility. Detective Mercer presented his forensic timeline analysis, and Diane Yarbrough submitted comprehensive documentation of financial connections between Westridge Mining, Aegis Strategic Solutions, and government contracting agencies. The hearing transcripts remain classified, but the outcome was unprecedented. 3 months later, the Department of Justice announced a new special investigation into potential criminal conspiracy surrounding the Millfield incident. 5 former executives from Aegis were indicted on charges ranging from kidnapping to conspiracy to commit murder. Most significantly, the government acknowledged that certain classified programs may have contributed to an environment where extreme ethical violations occurred without proper oversight. While stopping short of admitting direct involvement, this statement represented the first official recognition that the Millfield case extended beyond a lone killer. For the families, these revelations brought renewed trauma, but also vindication for those who had questioned the official narrative. The possibility that their children had survived for nearly 2 years after the abduction, likely subjected to unimaginable experimentation before being executed, was almost too horrific to contemplate. "I don't know which is worse," said Teresa Mitchell, mother of victim Daniel Mitchell, thinking he died quickly that day or knowing he might have suffered for years, hoping for a rescue that never came. "But I do know that I want every person involved in this atrocity held accountable, no matter how high this goes." The special investigation continues today, hampered by classification barriers and institutional resistance. Key documents remain redacted, certain facilities cannot be accessed, witnesses cite national security concerns to avoid testifying. Noah Sullivan, once portrayed as a deranged lone wolf, appears increasingly to have been merely the visible face of a much larger operation, perhaps even a scapegoat programmed to take responsibility through the very treatments that damaged his mind. His suicide, once seen as a final act of cowardice, now appears potentially orchestrated to ensure his silence. The convenient death of his former supervisor, Victor Rollins, similarly suggests an effort to eliminate witnesses who could expose the broader conspiracy. Most disturbing of all is the possibility that the bus's discovery in 2020 was not accidental, but deliberate. The final phase of an experiment designed to observe public and institutional responses to a mass casualty event with complex psychological dimensions. "We have to consider that everything we think we know about this case might be by design," Detective Mercer warned. "Every reaction, every investigation thread, every emotional response, all of it potentially data points in someone's twisted research project. For the town of Millfield, the expanding investigation has prevented any possibility of closure. The memorial garden at the elementary school, once a place of solemn remembrance, has become a gathering point for protesters demanding full disclosure of government involvement. National media has returned, excavating painful memories with each new revelation. Some families have embraced the fight for truth, becoming vocal advocates for government accountability. Others have withdrawn completely, unable to bear the continuous reopening of wounds that never fully healed. The 30 children who boarded a yellow school bus on an autumn morning in 2010, excited about dinosaurs and permission slips clutched in small hands, have become symbols of something far larger than their individual tragedies. They represent fundamental questions about institutional power, classified research, and the boundaries of ethical governance. In the wake of these revelations, similar cases across the country are being re-examined. Disappearances, once considered isolated incidents, are being scrutinized for potential connections to classified research programs. The ripple effects of the Millfield investigation continue to expand, threatening to expose decades of potential abuses hidden behind national security classifications. For Diane Yarbrough, whose reporting broke the case open, the investigation has become a life's mission. This isn't just about 34 victims anymore, she explained. It's about systems that allow human beings to become expendable in service of classified objectives. It's about who we are as a society and what we are willing to tolerate in the name of national security. The processing facility north of Millfield has since been demolished, hastily razed within weeks of its connection to the case becoming public. Former Aegis employees involved in security operations there have reported harassment, surveillance, and in some cases, explicit threats. Dr. Patel, whose whistleblowing set much of this in motion, lives under continuous protection, moving frequently to avoid potential retaliation. His testimony before various governmental bodies has expanded beyond the Millfield case to address broader issues of ethical oversight in classified research. What happened to my daughter and those other children represents the ultimate ethical failure, Dr. Patel testified. When we decide that any human life is acceptable collateral damage for research objectives, we have abandoned the very principles we claim to be protecting. The trial of the 5 indicted Aegis executives, scheduled to begin next month, may provide some answers, though many expect national security restrictions to limit public disclosure. 3 of the defendants have already attempted to negotiate plea agreements in exchange for reduced sentences, suggesting they possess information valuable enough to bargain with. For Detective Mercer, now in his 70s and battling health issues, the expanding investigation represents both vindication and profound sadness. I have spent 12 years trying to uncover the truth about those 34 victims, Mercer reflected. I always knew the official story didn't add up, but the reality we are uncovering is far worse than anything I could have imagined. These weren't just murders. This was an atrocity committed with institutional backing. As this article goes to print, breaking news suggests the conspiracy may reach even higher than previously thought. Congresswoman Eleanor Palmer, chair of the classified hearings in 2022, has announced her intention to pursue a full public inquiry, citing evidence of authorization for the Millfield operation at the highest levels of government. The American people deserve to know the complete truth, Palmer stated in a press release. No classification level should shield those responsible for the deaths of 30 children and 4 adults. This case tests the very foundation of our democracy and our commitment to justice, regardless of power or position. For the 30 children who never returned from their field trip, justice remains incomplete. For the 4 adults who died with them, questions about their knowledge or involvement remain unanswered. For a small Pennsylvania town forever defined by this tragedy, healing seems impossible, while new revelations continue to emerge. The yellow school bus, buried 15 feet underground for a decade, has been fully exhumed, but the secrets surrounding its disappearance continue to be unearthed, layer by layer, revealing a conspiracy potentially more far-reaching than anyone initially imagined. What began as the story of a missing school bus has evolved into an examination of classified research ethics, institutional accountability, and the dark possibilities that exist when operations are shielded from public scrutiny. The 34 victims of Millfield deserve nothing less than complete truth, no matter how powerful those implicated may be, no matter how uncomfortable the revelations. until that truth is fully exposed. They remain buried under layers of classification, redaction, and institutional protection. Their bodies have been recovered, but justice for them remains entombed. As Amanda Gallagher, mother of Zachary, put it, "We found their bodies. Now we need to find the truth about why they died. Only then can they truly rest in peace. Only then can we." The investigation continues, the questions multiply, and somewhere, perhaps, those who authorized the Millfield operation observed the unfolding consequences of actions they never expected to become public. Actions that transformed 30 excited children on a field trip into unwilling martyrs in humanity's darkest experiment.